The progress bar on my laptop crept forward while the Naples sky burned gold, and for a breath I heard nothing but the soft hum of the fan and the distant clink of dinnerware I wasn't invited to. My finger hovered over the trackpad steady in a way that would have surprised the woman I used to be. The subject line sat where I left it, sharp as glass, daring me to blink first. From the waterfront, the Ritz's ballroom lights glowed like a theater about to raise its curtain. A text from Lucas slid onto my screen, something cheerful and meaningless, and I let it fade. If I'd pressed send right then, the room down the street would have changed temperature in an instant. Instead, I breathed, counted to 10, and remembered how all of this began long before I learned to love silence. Before I continue, let me know in the comments where you're listening from, and if you've ever had to choose dignity over comfort. And if this kind of true family story keeps you company at night, tap like and subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter. My name is Vanessa, and I built a life in Naples out of color palettes, client lists, and a stubborn belief in mutual effort. I grew up in a teacher's house where you ironed your shirt and kept your word. Nothing fancy, but every promise mattered. When I met Lucas at a charity auction 7 years ago, he was charming in the way that makes a crowded room feel like a private booth, ambitious without apology, and certain we could make a future worth staying up late for. He worked in corporate strategy, then all crisp collars and big talk, while I had a small but profitable interior design firm that survived on referrals and late-night sketches at the kitchen table. We liked the same wine, the same radio station on long drives, and the same story about ourselves, two people climbing together, hand over honest hand. Our days found a rhythm that photographed weekday coffees on the balcony, while the Gulf breeze lifted the bougainvillea Thursday cocktails for his colleagues under strings of warm patio lights. Saturdays spent following the coast just to see where sunlight turned the water silver. He was quick with gratitude when I coached him through the social parts of his job, the right bottle for a client dinner, the small talk that isn't small when it pays a mortgage, the thank you note that lands before sunrise. I took pride in that invisible work, the kind that smooths paths without asking for applause, and he repaid it with 1,000 small gestures that said we were a team. When he moved up to senior leadership at Whitmore & Cole, I told everyone it was the product of long nights and a good man's discipline. I set out dessert forks and believed my own words. Claire arrived 2 years ago, all economy of motion and the kind of gaze that measures return before it measures welcome. She wasn't warm, but she was direct, and at first I respected her for it. Women who've had to fight for the room rarely waste time apologizing for standing in it. She asked about my business at events and sent 2 of her friends my way, which paid a quarter's rent and a little of my skepticism. When Lucas spoke about her, it was with the admiration people reserve for mountains and market caps, and I reminded myself not to confuse awe with disloyalty. In those months, if a worry knocked, I busied my hands, new fabric line, new client, new layout, until the room was once again too pretty for doubt to sit down. The harmony held, at least on paper. We kept date nights on Tuesdays at a bistro that learned our order, and we made plans for a winter trip we never booked. He worked later, yes, but promotions asked their price in hours, and I paid mine in patience. When his phone started buzzing face down, I told myself privacy can be honorable too. When a Saturday tradition gave way to a quick office stop and a promise to make it up to me, I set the table anyway, let the candle burn low, and pretended time could be saved like money. I remember the first moment that felt like heat, not light, and it was small enough to dismiss if you wanted the evening to stay gentle. We were hosting a backyard gathering for a handful of his colleagues, charcuterie, antique jazz, low enough to talk over Naples behaving in that soft way that makes you forgive the mosquitoes. Claire stood near the bar in a deep blue dress, laughing at something Lucas said, and her hand lingered on his sleeve just long enough to be a sentence. He didn't pull away, didn't lean in, just let the touch live in the air between them, a quiet claim anyone could ignore if they needed to sleep that night. I smiled so my face wouldn't tell on me, and refilled a guest's glass, thinking that some stories begin with a whisper. You pretend is the wind. I didn't know it then, but the first crack had already found the foundation, and by the next Thursday, it would spread. The evening in our backyard should have been like any other, lights strung between palm trees, the clink of glasses, easy laughter drifting into the warm Naples air. I moved between guests, topping off wine and arranging platters, playing the part of the hostess I'd grown used to being. From across the patio, I caught sight of Claire leaning toward Lucas, the deep navy of her dress catching the glow from the lanterns. Her hand lingered on his arm just long enough to make something inside me shift. He didn't brush it away, didn't lean in either, just let it sit there like a silent word between them. I told myself not to overthink that it was nothing more than workplace familiarity. Later that night, as we cleared glasses and stacked dishes, I tried to make light of it. You and Claire seemed to hit it off tonight, I said, my tone as even as I could manage. He didn't smile or laugh it off. Instead, he shrugged and replied, "She's my boss, Vanessa. If she's happy, the whole company is happy." He meant it as a practical answer, but it stayed with me colder than I expected. It wasn't the words alone, it was the way he spoke them, as if keeping her satisfied was a higher priority than keeping me reassured. Life carried on, as if nothing had shifted, at least on the surface. We still kept our Tuesday dinners at Campiello, and still hosted colleagues on Thursday evenings. But I began to notice little things stacking up, details I would have ignored before. Lucas's hours grew longer, creeping later into the night, until I'd find myself alone at the table dinner, cooling untouched. Sometimes he came home past midnight. His tie loosened his cologne faint, but not the one he had left wearing that morning. I would ask how his day went, and he'd brush it off with a quick "just work" before slipping into the shower. His phone began buzzing, more often the screen face down on the counter. The previews were turned off, so I couldn't see names or fragments of text. Once, when I handed it to him during a call, he grabbed it back so quickly that the gesture itself stung more than the excuse he muttered about a work emergency. I told myself it was nothing, that promotions demanded secrecy and late hours. But when patterns form, even small things begin to feel like threads being pulled from the seams. One Saturday in May, we were supposed to drive to Marco Island for lunch, something we had done since our first year together. I wore the white sundress he once said made me look like I belonged on a postcard, hoping the day might remind us of what we used to be. 15 minutes before we were set to leave, his phone rang. He stepped outside to take it, his voice low and clipped posture tense. When he came back, he grabbed his keys and said, "Rain check. Claire needs me at the office." I laughed at first, thinking he was joking. On a Saturday, for what I asked. His smile was practiced, almost rehearsed. "She's closing a deal in Dubai. Time zones." He kissed my cheek and walked out, leaving me standing with my purse in hand and a silence that pressed harder than any storm. That afternoon, I sat alone on the balcony with a glass of wine, staring at the Gulf as a storm built in the distance. The air was heavy, charged in a way that made my skin prickle, though no rain had fallen yet. I wanted to believe it was nothing, just a busy season, just a demanding boss. But somewhere deep down, I felt the foundation of our life shift, even if I wasn't ready to say it out loud. The confirmation came weeks later, on a night when the sky finally did open rain, pouring down in heavy sheets, while lightning flashed over the water. Lucas called to say he would be late again. His tone clipped as always. I nearly let it go, nearly poured another glass of wine, and tried to forget the ache growing in my chest. Then my phone buzzed with a message from Sienna, an old friend who was married to another executive at Whitmore and Cole. "Are you at this dinner thing too? Thought you'd be here with Lucas." My fingers stilled as I typed back, "What dinner?" A moment later, she sent a photo. The picture was grainy, taken from across a dining room, but clear enough. A long table dressed in white linen's glasses gleaming under amber lights. And there in the center was Lucas leaning toward Claire. His smile wasn't polite or professional. It was soft or private, the kind of smile you give someone who already knows how to draw you in. I stared at that photo until the edges blurred, a sick heaviness twisting through me. I didn't respond to Sienna. I didn't call Lucas. I didn't even cry. I just sat in the quiet, listening to the rain hammer the windows and the clock tick across the room. I knew in my bones what it meant, but I wanted something more than a photograph. I wanted proof that couldn't be denied, something they couldn't explain away. 2 days later, the proof arrived. Ryan Patel, the head of IT, reached out and asked to meet me for coffee. We hadn't spoken in months, but years earlier, I had helped him cover up a scheduling disaster that nearly cost him his job, smoothing it over with calls and favors he couldn't have managed alone. He slid a flash drive across the table, his eyes tired, his voice low. "That kind of debt doesn't vanish," he said. "I shouldn't be giving you this, but you deserve to see it." I drove home without breaking the speed limit, though. My hands trembled on the wheel. In my office, I closed the door, slid the drive into my laptop, and waited. One file appeared, a video 4 minutes and 42 seconds long. My breath caught as the screen opened onto Lucas's office. I recognized the walnut desk, the floor-to-ceiling windows. The timestamp showed it was from the previous Friday. The door opened, and in came Claire's silk blouse, crisp hair, pinned like she'd just walked out of a board meeting. Lucas followed still in his suit. For a moment, they talked, voices too low to catch. Then she touched his chest, kissed him, and he pulled her in without hesitation. Papers scattered from the desk, his tie loosened, their laughter casual and unashamed. There was nothing secret about it, no clumsy fumbling. It was practiced, familiar, the kind of intimacy that only comes with time. When the video ended, I realized my nails had dug crescents into the arm of my chair. I couldn't remember making a sound, yet my throat ached. The grief hit first, sharp and suffocating, 7 years of trust collapsing in an instant. Then came the anger, slow and rising, filling me until my skin burned. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a single lapse. It was deliberate, calculated, and it had been happening long enough that it felt routine to them. That night, I lay in bed pretending to be asleep when Lucas came home. I could smell her perfume, clinging faintly to his jacket as he hung it in the closet. I kept my breathing even, my body still, though. Inside, I was unraveling. For the next few days, I carried on as if nothing had changed. I kissed him goodbye in the mornings, asked about his day, texted him about groceries. But inside, I was watching, calculating, waiting. The photo had opened the first crack. The video had torn it wide. And as I lay awake in the silence of our home, I knew with certainty that this wasn't just a betrayal. It was an insult. They thought I would never see it. They thought even if I did, I would choose comfort over dignity. What they didn't know was that silence doesn't always mean surrender. Sometimes it means the storm is gathering. For the first few days after I saw the video, I moved through the house like a shadow of myself. I wasn't yelling. I wasn't crying. I wasn't even confronting him. I made dinner, folded laundry, answered emails, and kept my hands busy while my chest felt hollow. Lucas thought my silence meant I was blind, or worse, that I'd chosen to look away. He kissed me goodbye in the mornings, told me to sleep well at night, and never noticed the way my eyes followed him with a new kind of detachment. I studied him the way you study an opponent you know you'll have to face. Every excuse he gave, every late night at the office, every new cologne that lingered on his collar, I stored it like evidence in a case file. When he scrolled through his phone too quickly or turned the screen just out of my view, I noticed the small flecks of his fingers. When his smile seemed too eager at dinner, I paid attention to the way his eyes darted before he spoke. He had no idea I was watching with intention, now not as a wife, hoping to believe, but as someone preparing for war. The temptation to leave quietly gnawed at me in those nights, when the house was silent and the world outside felt far away. I imagined packing a single suitcase, taking the money I'd saved, and disappearing to a place with no forwarding address. I thought about what it would mean to be free of him, free of all the lies, starting over with nothing but my own name. But then I would picture Claire's smile at a gala, or her cool glance across a table, the way she'd looked at me like I was irrelevant, like I was something she'd stepped over on her way to what she wanted. That memory hardened me, made me realize that walking away would mean giving her the satisfaction of victory. The anger came slowly, like a fire building from embers. I'd find myself gripping the edge of the sink, staring at the marble countertop we'd chosen together. And suddenly, the veins in the stone looked like cracks spreading through my marriage. Sometimes I pressed my palms into my eyes until I saw stars, but the ache in my chest stayed. 7 years of memories of building a life together all felt poisoned by the ease with which he laughed in that office video. What broke me most wasn't the act itself. It was the casualness of it, as if betraying me had become part of his routine. One evening, Lucas walked into the kitchen as I was pouring wine. He leaned against the counter, casual smiling like nothing was wrong. "You've been quiet lately," he said. I took a slow sip, set the glass down, and answered, "Just focused on work." He nodded, kissed my forehead, and walked away. That was the moment I realized how little suspicion he had, how convinced he was of his invincibility. To him, I was still the steady wife who would cover for his absences, smile through his excuses, and keep our world intact while he tore it down behind closed doors. I let him believe it. I leaned into the performance knowing it gave me time. Time to decide what justice would look like, time to consider whether I wanted to scorch the earth beneath him or leave quietly with my dignity. The more I thought, the more I understood that this wasn't just about an affair. It was about being made a fool, about being underestimated and dismissed. And that realization began to change me. At night, lying in bed with my back turned to him, I planned. While he showered, I stared at the closet where his suits hung neatly, the scent of someone else's perfume still clinging faintly to the fabric. When he sat across the table scrolling through his phone, I memorized the way his jaw tightened at every new notification. I told myself that if they wanted me to be blind, then I'd blindside them instead. The hardest part was keeping my composure in public. We attended a fundraiser 2 weeks after I received the video. People laughed, clinked glasses, asked about business, and I smiled through every conversation as if nothing inside me had shifted. Lucas shook hands, told stories, and played the devoted husband while I stood beside him thinking about the footage hidden on my laptop at home. When Claire walked past me in her tailored suit, her eyes flicking in my direction just long enough to acknowledge me, I didn't flinch. But inside, I felt a storm pressing against the walls of my chest, demanding release. Even Sienna noticed the change in me. Over lunch one afternoon, she studied me across the table and said softly, "You seem different, Vanessa. Is everything all right?" I stirred my coffee, careful not to let my hand tremble, and replied, "Just tired. Work has been heavy." She looked unconvinced but didn't press further, and I was grateful. No one could know yet, not even her. My silence wasn't surrender, it was strategy. I started to imagine what it would feel like to expose them. I pictured Lucas's expression freezing when the truth finally reached him, the panic in his eyes when the facade collapsed. I imagined Claire's perfect composure cracking in front of people who had once admired her. The vision gave me strength, a private anchor that kept me steady when the weight of betrayal felt too heavy. I wasn't ready to move yet, but I was no longer drowning. I was waiting. One Thursday evening, Lucas was in the shower when an email popped up on his laptop, still linked to our joint account. It was from the company's events coordinator detailing the final seating chart for the upcoming quarterly shareholder dinner. I opened it out of habit, scanning the names without much thought until I saw it. Table 1, Lucas Mayers seated directly to the right of Claire Whitmore. No spouses, no guests. Just the two of them surrounded by the most powerful investors in the company. My chest tightened, but this time, it wasn't from pain. It was clarity. For weeks, I had been carrying grief, anger, and silence like stones in my hands, unsure where to set them down. Now I had a stage, a spotlight, and the perfect audience. If they wanted to parade their bond in front of the company's most influential people, then I would give them a performance they would never forget. I closed the laptop slowly, my reflection faint in the darkened screen. The temptation to confront him that night was strong, but I knew better. Rage burns quickly. Strategy burns clean. As I listened to the water running in the bathroom, I thought about how easily he had dismissed me, how certain he was that I would never fight back. And in that moment, something inside me shifted from grief to resolve. I didn't have the plan fully formed yet, but I knew one thing: I would not walk away quietly. Not anymore. They had mistaken my silence for weakness, and soon they would see what it really meant. The shareholder dinner became the moment that turned my grief into strategy. When I read that seating chart, I knew I'd been handed an opening I couldn't ignore. It wasn't just that Lucas would be beside Claire. It was that every major investor, every board member, and every voice with real power in that company would be sitting within reach when the truth dropped. That kind of audience couldn't be bought back once their confidence cracked, and for the first time since discovering the affair, I felt steady rather than broken. That night over dinner, Lucas spoke casually about the event. He cut into his salmon-sipping wine with the easy arrogance of a man certain the world admired him. "Big night next week," he said, his tone almost cheerful. "Might come home late?" I smiled, topping off his glass as if nothing in me had shifted. "Of course," I answered softly. "You'll do great." He had no idea he was feeding me the exact information I needed. In the days that followed, my mind turned with a clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. I reached out to Ryan again, careful with my words, knowing his silence came from a debt he still felt bound to repay. When I asked him for help with a file compressed, sharpened, encrypted, he didn't question me. He simply delivered what I requested, his voice even over the phone. "It'll hold up anywhere," he said. "No one can deny what's on it." I thanked him, my gratitude real, but my thoughts already moving ahead to how it would be used. I drafted the message in pieces, erasing and retyping until it was stripped down to the simplest line. No emotion, no explanation, nothing for them to twist against me. Just one sentence, clear and undeniable, paired with the footage that would speak louder than any confrontation ever could. I saved it to a clean draft, attached the file, and encrypted it twice, once with Ryan's software, once with my own. Looking at the words on the screen, I felt no trembling in my hands, only calm. Meanwhile, Lucas carried on as though he were living in a different story entirely. He grew almost affectionate, bringing me coffee in bed, suggesting weekend trips we both knew would never happen, leaning in for kisses, as if he were a man deeply secure in his place. His sudden attentiveness might have been guilt, or maybe it was just the arrogance of believing he'd already won. Each gesture only reinforced what I knew: he didn't see me as capable of disrupting the life he'd so carefully staged. One evening, I caught him watching me in the mirror as I brushed my hair. "You've been distant," he said, his reflection calm, his eyes curious, but not cautious. I met his gaze briefly, then looked back to my own face in the glass. "Just focused on clients," I replied. He nodded, satisfied, and turned away. That small exchange sealed something for me. If he couldn't read the change in me now, he never would, until it was too late. I began to map out the night in detail. Timing mattered. If the message went out too early, they could scramble whisper damage control before the speeches began. Too late, and the room would empty before the weight of it settled. 7:30 became my mark the moment the first course would be set, phones within reach, and conversations warm enough that a ripple of silence would feel unnatural. I rehearsed it in my head, clicking send in my imagination until the sequence became second nature. During those preparations, I reminded myself not to be careless. Lucas almost caught me once stepping into the office doorway while I reviewed the video. I slammed the laptop shut quickly, plastering on a calm smile. "Working late?" he asked lightly. "Client deadlines." I answered, my voice steady. He kissed my cheek and walked away without pressing further, but my heart didn't slow for several minutes. It was a warning, one misstep, and everything could crumble before it began. So I tightened my routines. My laptop stayed locked in my office password, protected with codes I'd never shared. Every draft and file was secured twice, every step rehearsed, until there was no room for chance. I tested the email system Ryan had set up, sending files to a dummy account until I was certain of the timing down to the second. There could be no delays, no mistakes. Still, there were moments when doubt tried to creep in. I would sit at the balcony at dusk, glass of wine in hand, and wonder if exposing them this way would burn me too. Would I look vindictive, desperate, bitter? I weighed those questions carefully, knowing what was at stake. But then I would remember Claire's cool glance at the fundraiser, the way Lucas's smile had softened for her in Sienna's photo, and the sound of his laugh in that office video. And my doubts would fall quiet. A public betrayal deserved a public reckoning, and this was the stage they had chosen for themselves. On the night before the dinner, Lucas came home early, finding me in the kitchen with my laptop open. I had been finalizing my recipient list, every shareholder, every senior partner, every department head who needed to see the truth. He frowned slightly, curious. "Still working?" he asked, loosening his tie. I closed the laptop smoothly, forcing my voice to stay even. "Big client opportunity," I said. "If I land it, it changes everything." He smiled proudly, kissed me on the forehead, and moved on. He never questioned me again. The morning of the shareholder dinner arrived, and with it came a steadiness I hadn't expected. No panic, no second thoughts, just the calm of someone who knew the outcome had already been decided. Lucas left the house at 5, tailored suit, pressed cologne sharp, carrying himself like a man convinced the night would be his triumph. He kissed my cheek before walking out the door, and I let him go, knowing the ground beneath him would be gone by the time he returned. By 7 o'clock, I was in my office, a glass of wine at my side, the Naples sunset casting molten gold across the room. The laptop was open, the draft ready, the schedule locked in place. Through the window, I could see the faint glow of the Ritz ballroom down the waterfront, every guest already seated, blissfully unaware of what was about to unfold. I placed my hand on the mouse, not because I needed to, but because I wanted to feel the weight of the moment. As the clock ticked towards 7:30, I thought about every late night alone, every lie, every glance Claire had given me. I thought about how certain they were that I would remain silent, and I smiled because silence was about to become the loudest sound in that room. At exactly 7:30, the timer on my screen shifted, and the file launched, invisible but unstoppable. For a moment, there was nothing, just the quiet hum of my laptop and the faint clink of glass from the kitchen. Then, like the first ripple before a storm, the signals began to spread. In the Ritz ballroom down the waterfront, a department head's phone buzzed first. He frowned, tapped, and the video opened in his palm. Recognition spread across his face like a shadow moving through water. A minute later, a second phone lit up, then a third. The music softened, voices thinned, and the atmosphere changed as surely as if a curtain had been pulled. I pictured Claire mid-conversation, her assistant at another table already holding a hand over her mouth. Gossip in rooms like that never stayed quiet. By the time the first course was set down, the truth was circling the tables faster than the servers could pour wine. I refreshed the secure channel Ryan had given me, watching screenshots appear on the company's internal feed stills from the video paired with blunt captions. "Well, that explains the overtime," one message read. Lucas's phone would have buzzed a minute later, and I could imagine the precise moment he saw the subject line, "Your CEO," and "my husband." His smile freezing his jaw, locking the vein in his temple throbbing. I had lived with him long enough to know the sequence by heart, though this time it wasn't me he performed for. It was a room full of shareholders. Claire's reaction came next in my mind, her polished composure cracking when she realized the shift in the room wasn't coincidence, but exposure. 3 seconds of stillness, then color-draining calculation flashing across her face. Lucas tried to stand. I was certain, but the moment was already gone. Screens had multiplied, the whispers had turned into open conversation, and the board's patience was a thread waiting to snap. I leaned back in my chair, glass of wine cool in my hand, as the internal messages rolled faster. Stills of Claire perched on Lucas's desk, her hand on his tie. His laugh caught mid-frame. The captions moved from disbelief to mockery, and within minutes, from mockery to outrage. It wasn't only scandal now, it was money risk and liability. 10 minutes later, the first blow landed outside the room. A local journalist I recognized from business features tweeted the clip with the word "developing" in bold. Within seconds, it began to spread, no context required. The ballroom might have held its silence, but the world outside was already cracking open the door. At 7:37, I refreshed again and saw the first mention of company funds. The PDF I had attached with overlapping travel dates and expenses had begun to circulate. Who paid for this one executive wrote his message clipped and sharp. The shift was immediate. What had been gossip a moment ago became something heavier, potential, embezzlement, misuse of corporate money. The kind of suspicion that could sink a career faster than scandal ever could. Lucas's calls came next. My phone lit up with his name once, twice, 3 times. I turned it face down on the desk, letting it vibrate against the wood. His messages followed. "We need to talk. It's not what it looks like. Please pick up." Each one more frantic than the last, but I didn't move. I poured another glass, steady and deliberate, because I didn't want to remember myself as panicked. I wanted to remember myself as calm and control, a woman who knew exactly what she was doing. By 7:40, Claire had walked out of the ballroom, her assistant trailing behind Lucas, close on her heels. A board member had already left before them, phone in hand, expression unreadable. The dominoes had started, and there was no pulling them back. Through my office window, I could see the shimmer of lights reflecting off the water, the hotel still standing tall, while its walls contained a collapse. Within minutes, the first national outlet picked up the story. By 8:10, the company's vice chairman sent an email that was short and final. Claire placed on indefinite leave, Lucas suspended. My office was silent, but for the quiet hum of my computer. Yet in that stillness, I felt the reverberation of a structure caving in. I didn't answer his final call that night, nor the ones that followed. I didn't need to. By the time the ballroom emptied, the decision was already made. Their world had cracked in public, and I had been the one to break it. The next morning, Naples looked unchanged. The Gulf still glittered, pelicans still skimmed low. The cyclists still passed by with their morning coffee. But beneath the calm, a shift hung heavy in the air. Headlines had already spread linking Claire's resignation and Lucas's termination with words like scandal and misconduct. The quiet of the water felt almost like the pause after a hurricane when the damage isn't visible yet, but you know it's there. The first calls from reporters came before noon. I ignored them. My name wasn't in their stories, and it didn't need to be. What mattered was that the two of them who thought themselves untouchable were suddenly fragile in the light of day. But even as I sat with that satisfaction, I knew I wasn't done. What had happened at the Ritz was only the surface, a public crack. I still carried something heavier, the uncut video Ryan had given me, the one with audio that could shift everything from scandal to investigation. The morning after the dinner, the city moved as if nothing had shifted, but the silence felt different. The Gulf still glittered under the sun, cyclists still streamed down Fifth Avenue, and cafes still filled with chatter. But when I unfolded the newspaper, Claire's pale face stared back at me from the front page. Beside it, Lucas's headshot was placed like a cruel comparison, his smile suddenly stripped of charm, frozen in a moment where the world had turned. The headline carried words they couldn't outrun: scandal, misconduct, investigation. By noon, national outlets had picked up the story. Television anchors spoke their names with the sharp cadence of breaking news, and websites ran their photos under banners that promised updates by the hour. Whitmore and Cole scrambled to issue statements cold and clipped, announcing that Claire had resigned and Lucas had been terminated effective immediately. It didn't mention company funds, but everyone reading between the lines knew the suspicion was there. The stock dropped 12% by the end of the week, and their biggest client froze all projects. I ignored Lucas's messages as they piled up, each one longer and more frantic than the last. "We can work through this one read." Hours later, another. "You've ruined me." I created a folder on my laptop and dropped every email into it, labeling it for the scrapbook. He must have realized I wasn't going to answer, but he didn't stop trying. Claire, on the other hand, reached out only once. A single text appeared one afternoon. "You've made a powerful enemy." I deleted it without a second thought. An enemy without power was just a voice in the dark. In the days that followed, the isolation began to surround them. Colleagues who once raised glasses at parties now leaked quotes to the press, each one sharper than the last. Stories about arrogance, questionable expenses, and late-night behavior surfaced in every article. Lucas's gym membership was suspended for policy reasons, though everyone knew gossip was the real cause. Claire was spotted at the golf club alone, her entourage gone. The condo they'd used for overnight stays quietly appeared on the market, a property no one wanted to be linked to anymore. Watching from the quiet of my home, I felt the satisfaction of seeing them unravel. But satisfaction wasn't the same as closure. I still carried the uncut video Ryan had given me, the version with audio. I had guarded it carefully, telling myself it was enough to hold it in reserve. Yet one night, as I replayed it with headphones, I caught the detail I had overlooked before. Between laughter and the shuffle of papers, Claire mentioned a confidential merger by name. Lucas's voice followed, light and reckless. "We'll cash out before they even see it coming." The words stayed with me. They weren't proof of a crime, not by themselves, but they hinted at something more dangerous than scandal, insider knowledge, and manipulation. I weighed the file in my hands as though it carried physical weight. By morning, I knew what I would do. I uploaded the full video to a secure government portal, one designed for anonymous tips. No name, no return address, just the file and a short note. "You might want to check the dates on this one." I didn't expect fireworks. Investigations moved slowly, buried under layers of process. But knowing the file existed in their system was enough for me. Even if Lucas or Claire tried to rebuild their reputations, there would always be a shadow trailing them, a reminder that the past hadn't closed its book. Weeks passed before I saw Lucas again. I spotted him outside a coffee shop we used to visit together, the same one, with the blue awning and wrought iron tables on the sidewalk. He wore a suit jacket I had bought him 3 years ago, but it no longer looked sharp. The shoulders sagged, the fabric dulled, and his tie hung loose as though he hadn't bothered to finish dressing. His hair was unkempt, his eyes darting around like a man who wanted to disappear into the crowd. He didn't see me, and I didn't call out. I simply walked past, a quiet observer of what he had become. By the time I reached my car, my phone buzzed with a news alert. Former Whitmore and Cole executives face SEC inquiry. I didn't need to read the full article. The headline told me enough. My lips curved in a quiet smile as I started the engine. The road stretched ahead, salt air streaming in through the open window, carrying with it something lighter than victory. It was release, the knowledge that the justice I had set in motion no longer needed my hand to guide it. Yet even with that peace, I understood this wasn't the end. The scandal had humiliated them, stripped them of titles and power. But the investigation would be the true reckoning. Once federal eyes turned their way, there would be no retreat, no hidden path back into the world they once ruled. When the inquiry became public, everything moved faster than even I expected. Headlines that once spoke of scandal now carried sharper words: fraud investigation, possible charges. The press had already stripped away their reputations, but the government's eye made it official. People who once whispered about their downfall now spoke openly about whether prison terms might follow. For the first time, Lucas's name wasn't paired with ambition, and Claire's wasn't paired with power. They were bound together by disgrace. Lucas tried reaching out again, not with angry words this time, but with pleas. He sent letters by courier, each one written in the rushed scrawl I hadn't seen since his college days. "Vanessa, you know me one read. This can't be how we end." Another begged for a meeting, insisting there had been mistakes, misunderstandings, things taken out of context. I didn't answer. Each envelope went into the same drawer, sealed and forgotten relics of a man who no longer had a stage to stand on. Claire retreated from sight, her lawyer speaking on her behalf, but her name appeared in articles daily. Former associates came forward with quiet testimonies, investors leaked details of private conversations, and clients abandoned her like a ship taking on water. The woman who once commanded boardrooms with her presence now had no allies left to defend her. Even the golf club, her chosen sanctuary, suspended her membership, citing a need to avoid distractions. For weeks, I watched as the dominoes continued to fall. The condo they once used for their nights together sold quickly, the listing described only as a prime location with motivated sellers. Their possessions appeared on secondary markets, luxury items passed along at discount prices to erase reminders of their names. Colleagues who once aligned themselves with them now denied ever being close. The isolation was complete, and it happened in silence, just as I had wanted. I saw Lucas once more, not at a coffee shop this time, but outside the courthouse, captured in a photo printed on the front page of the local paper. His suit was wrinkled, his hair uncombed, and his eyes looked hollow in a way I had never seen before. He was holding a folder against his chest like a shield, his lips pressed tight as reporters crowded near. The caption below the image read, "Former executive appears for preliminary hearing." I cut the article out and slid it into the scrapbook with the others. In Naples, people whispered, but not about me. I could move freely, my name never tied to the scandal. At dinner parties and charity events, acquaintances spoke of the downfall with wide eyes, repeating headlines, and speculating about consequences. I listened quietly, nodding, never revealing my part. It wasn't my story in their eyes, it was theirs. And that was exactly as I wanted it. The satisfaction I felt was steady, not sharp. It wasn't the giddy rush of victory, but the calm weight of balance restored. Every betrayal, every late night alone, every humiliation had been answered with precision. They were left with nothing but each other, bound together, not by affection, but by the ruin they had created. I had given them the stage they wanted, and it had collapsed under their feet. Still, I knew the ending hadn't yet arrived. The inquiry would stretch on, and headlines would fade, but consequences move slowly and with permanence. There would be more to come, hearings, depositions, decisions that would seal their futures. My part was finished, but the echo of what I had done would continue long after my hand had left it. I returned to my work, my home, my life rebuilt in quiet ways. Clients still came, friends still called, and the world didn't stop to ask what had carried me through. At night, when I stepped onto the balcony and let the Gulf air wash over me, I thought about how silence had once been my prison. Now it was my weapon, and it had freed me. Their world had come crashing down. Justice had been served not in courtrooms or board meetings, but in the quiet persistence of truth finally seen. And yet, as I closed the scrapbook one last time, I knew there was still one chapter left, the part where I would finally lay this story to rest. When the inquiry settled into its rhythm and their names faded from the daily news, I realized the story had already given me what I needed. Lucas and Claire had lost the careers they had fought for, the reputation they guarded, and the influence they believed untouchable. Every room that once bent to them now closed its doors, and the silence of abandonment was louder than anything I could have spoken myself. I didn't have to follow each headline anymore. The truth was already etched into their futures. I thought I might feel a rush of triumph when the last article was printed, but what I felt was quieter. It was peace, the kind that comes when a storm finally passes, and you can walk through your home without listening for cracks in the walls. For the first time in months, I could sit with a cup of tea in the morning, watch the sunlight spread across my table, and breathe without carrying a knot in my chest. There were days when memories tried to sting me. His laugh in that office, her cold eyes across a gala table. But they lost their edge over time. Each reminder no longer cut. It only confirmed that I had chosen dignity over silence. I hadn't screamed. I hadn't begged. I hadn't let them define how my story ended. Instead, I had stepped back, gathered proof, and waited until the moment was right. Ryan went back to his life quietly, and I never burdened him with thanks beyond what was proper. He had risked enough by trusting me, and I honored that by keeping his part in the shadows. Sienna remained a steady presence, never pressing for details, but always reminding me that friendship doesn't falter when the world feels unsteady. I learned who stood by me and who only admired me when my life looked perfect from the outside. As for Lucas and Claire, I don't know where they are now, and I don't need to. Whether they live in smaller houses or try to rebuild careers under different names, they will always carry the shadow of what they lost. That shadow wasn't mine to create. It was theirs, but I was the one who chose to lift the curtain. And once light shines on betrayal, it can't be hidden again. What I carried forward wasn't revenge alone, but something more lasting. I had been reminded that silence doesn't always mean surrender. Sometimes it is preparation, patience, the steady gathering of strength until the right moment arrives. I had been reminded, too, that leaving quietly is not the only way to reclaim peace. Standing firm, even when underestimated, can restore dignity in ways no apology ever could. I built my life again, not in grand gestures, but in steady rhythms. Designing spaces for clients who trusted my cooking meals for myself, without waiting on someone else to join, filling my evenings with music instead of suspicion. The house felt different without his presence, but it wasn't emptier, it was freer. And freedom, I learned, doesn't come from running away. It comes from standing still until the ground belongs to you again. If there is a lesson in all of this, it's that betrayal will always cut, but it doesn't have to define the end of the story. Justice doesn't always arrive with a gavel or a raised voice. Sometimes it comes in the quiet, in the steady choices of a woman who refuses to be erased. And dignity once reclaimed is something no one can take back. Before we close, I'd love to know which part of this journey spoke most to you. Share your thoughts in the comments, and if you'd like to hear more true family stories like this one, stay connected here.